What if two lives ended in a place where danger was never expected? How does something happen in broad daylight, in a public space, yet leave behind nothing but silence? Who was there when no one was paying attention? Who noticed something, but didn't realize it mattered? And why, years later, do the answers still feel just out of reach? What if the most unsettling part of this story isn't what we know, but what we don't? This isn't a tale of chaos or spectacle. It's a story shaped by absence, by unanswered questions, by a truth that refuses to surface. Because some stories don't end, they wait. And this one has been waiting. Before this became a case file, before investigators' theories and unanswered questions, there were two lives moving through the world quietly, without spectacle, without fear. Carnell Sledge was the kind of person whose presence felt steady, not loud, not performative. He didn't seek attention, but people noticed him anyway, because he listened, because he showed up, because he cared. Friends described him as thoughtful, dependable, someone who carried himself with calm purpose. He believed in helping others, especially young people, and he lived with the idea that small kindnesses could shape lives. He had routines, conversations, plans for the future that felt reachable. The kind of future most of us expect, built slowly, day by day. Kate Brown moved through life with a different rhythm, but the same quiet depth. She loved animals deeply, not casually, but with commitment. Working with dogs, training service animals, spending time outdoors where the noise of the world softened. Nature was her reset. Calm spaces gave her clarity. People who knew her spoke about warmth, gentleness, and ease that made others feel comfortable around her. Kate didn't chase chaos. She leaned toward peace. Their lives were not dramatic, and that is exactly why this story matters. They weren't running from anything. They weren't hiding. They weren't involved in danger. They were friends. At some point, their paths crossed. Not through conflict, not through crisis, but through simple human connection. A friendship that didn't raise questions. A friendship that didn't feel risky. Just two people who trusted the world enough to sit and talk, to step away from routines, to spend time in a place that felt safe. That trust is important to remember, because when stories like this are told, the focus often shifts quickly to the moment everything went wrong. But the truth is, what came before matters just as much. The normalcy, the absence of fear, the lack of warning signs. Carnell had no known enemies. Kate had no reason to look over her shoulder. There were no frantic messages, no troubling calls, no last-minute changes that suggested something was off. Life at that point was ordinary, and ordinary days are dangerous in a different way, because they don't prepare you for the unthinkable. Somewhere ahead in this story, time will fracture, but here, in this moment, everything is still intact. Two people with futures still unfolding. Two families unaware of what's coming. A community going about its day, trusting that familiar places remain safe. This chapter is about that trust, because once it's broken, nothing ever feels the same again. And as we move forward, keep this in mind. Whatever happened next did not begin with chaos. It began with calm. Some days carry weight long before anyone realizes it. They begin like any other, quiet, predictable, forgettable. And later, they become impossible to forget. That day was June 4th, 2019. Morning arrived without urgency. Phones were checked, messages exchanged, plans formed casually, the way they always are. Nothing in the air suggested danger. Nothing hinted at the significance this date would soon hold. Carnell moved through the day as himself, steady, grounded, present. There was no rush, no distress, no sense that anything was wrong. Kate's day followed the same gentle rhythm. Responsibilities handled, thoughts on ordinary things. life continuing forward without resistance. At some point, a simple decision was made. A meeting, a conversation, time spent outdoors. They chose Rocky River Reservation, a familiar space known for its trails, riverbanks, and quiet stretches where people go to think, talk, breathe. It was the kind of place no one associates with fear, a place built on trust. The park that afternoon was what it always was. Sunlight filtered through tall trees. The river moved steadily, unconcerned. Visitors passed through in ones and twos, joggers, walkers, people lost in their own thoughts. Nothing about the setting stood out, and that's important, because danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it blends in perfectly. Carnell and Kate arrived separately, then together, settling into the space like countless others before them. To anyone nearby, there was nothing unusual about what they were doing. Two people sitting, talking, sharing time. No raised voices, no tension, no urgency, just presence. Minutes passed, then more. Time in places like this moves differently, slower, softer, unnoticed. Conversations drift. Silence becomes comfortable. The outside world fades. And somewhere during that window, a window that has since been examined over and over again, something changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, not in a way anyone nearby immediately recognized. That's what makes this moment so unsettling, because the transition from ordinary to irreversible did not come with chaos. It came quietly. Later, investigators would try to reconstruct these hours. Who entered the park? Who left? Who crossed paths without knowing it mattered? They would look at timelines, movements, shadows cast by the sun. But here, in this chapter, all we have is stillness. Two people, trusting a place they had no reason to fear. A park doing what it always does. A day moving forward, unaware it is approaching a breaking point. Nothing had gone wrong yet. Nothing appeared out of place. And that is the last moment where certainty exists. Because from this point forward, time no longer moves gently. It fractures. In places like this, silence usually feels comforting. It's the sound people come looking for, the absence of noise, the pause from life's pressure. But on this day, silence took on a different meaning. As the afternoon stretched on at Rocky River Reservation, the park slowly began to thin. The sun lowered, shadows lengthened, and the rhythm of the space shifted toward evening. People finished their walks. Joggers passed less frequently. The river continued its steady flow, indifferent to time. Somewhere along the embankment, two figures remained still. At first, nothing seemed unusual. In a park, stillness isn't alarming. People sit, people rest, people pause. But as minutes passed, that stillness didn't change. No movement, no conversation, no sign of life returning to that quiet spot. Eventually, someone noticed. Maybe it was the way the bodies hadn't shifted. Maybe it was intuition. That subtle human instinct that senses when something is wrong before logic can explain it. Whatever it was, concern replaced assumption. But closer look followed. Then another. And in that moment, the calm shattered. What had once been peaceful silence became something heavy, unnatural. The realization set in, not with drama, but with shock. The kind that freezes the body and empties the mind. A phone was pulled out. Hands trembled. Words struggled to form. A call was made. Within minutes, the atmosphere changed completely. Sirens cut through the air, breaking the quiet that had lingered all afternoon. Emergency vehicles approached, their lights reflecting off trees and water, turning the park into a scene no one expected to witness. First responders arrived quickly. They moved with urgency, but also with caution, stepping into a situation that didn't make sense. As they assessed the scene, one truth became clear almost immediately. Carnell, Sledge, and Kate Brown were gone. There were no cries to follow, no suspect in sight, no clear explanation waiting at the scene. Officers secured the area. Yellow tape stretched across grass and pathways. What had been open and welcoming moments before was now closed off, guarded, transformed. The park, a place of routine and safety, had become the center of an investigation. And yet, despite the activity, the scene itself offered very little. There was no obvious sign of struggle, no scattered belongings, no chaos frozen in place. Just two lives ended, and a quiet space that refused to explain how. As daylight faded, investigators began their work, documenting, observing, searching for something that might speak when no one else could. Flashlights replaced sunlight. Questions replaced assumptions. Who had been here earlier? Who might have passed by? Who entered the park unnoticed and left the same way? The stillness that followed was different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was unsettling, because somewhere between the calm of the afternoon and the arrival of sirens, something irreversible had happened, and no one could yet say how or why. This was the moment the story changed, not just for the investigation, but for everyone connected to it. From here on, nothing would feel simple again. When investigators began examining the area, they expected something, anything, to explain what had happened. Instead, they were met with absence. No scattered belongings, no frantic markings in the ground, no obvious trail leading away. Wallets remained. Phones were still there. Nothing suggested theft or panic. Whatever occurred was fast, controlled, and over before it could draw attention. That detail alone shifted the tone of the investigation. This didn't look impulsive. It didn't feel random. And it didn't leave behind easy answers. Officers searched the surrounding paths, the nearby trees, the river's edge, looking for signs that might point outward. A shell casing, a footprint, a discarded object. But the scene resisted explanation, offering only quiet certainty that someone had come and gone without being noticed. That realization settled in heavily, because it meant the person responsible didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't leave chaos behind. They blended back into the world, unseen. As evidence was collected and the area cleared, one question followed every step of the process. How does something like this happen here and leave so little behind? And more importantly, who knew enough to make it look this way? The park returned to stillness, but the mystery deepened. What investigators found mattered. What they didn't find mattered more. With the scene offering few clues, investigators shifted focus. If the truth wasn't in the grass or along the trails, it had to be in the hours leading up to that afternoon. Phones were examined, messages reviewed, timelines reconstructed. Detectives looked closely at who Carnell and Kate spoke with, where they had been, and what they planned. Every detail mattered now, even the ones that once felt insignificant. Friends and family were questioned. No warnings surfaced. No conflicts emerged. No signs of fear. The picture remained the same. Two people living ordinary lives who had no reason to expect danger. That lack of motive complicated everything. Without a clear reason, every possibility stayed open. Targeted or mistaken. Planned or spontaneous. Familiar face or passing stranger. The investigation pressed forward, but instead of narrowing, the questions began to widen. And with each unanswered lead, one truth became impossible to ignore. Someone knew more than they were saying. As days passed, the urgency faded, not because investigators stopped working, but because the case refused to speak. Leads came in, then dissolved. Tips sounded promising, then led nowhere. Each step forward seemed to circle back to the same place. Silence. No witness could place a suspect. No camera captured the moment that mattered. No confession surfaced. And that's when the weight of the situation set in. This wasn't just a difficult case. It was one built on absence. The absence of motive, the absence of mistakes, the absence of fear before the moment everything ended. Cases like this don't go cold suddenly. They cool slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed, until time becomes the enemy. Yet one unsettling thought refused to disappear. Whoever was responsible didn't vanish into darkness. They blended back into normal life. With answers still out of reach, theories began to fill the silence. Investigators didn't guess. They evaluated possibilities, each one unsettling in its own way. Was this personal? Someone who knew them well enough to approach without raising alarm? Was it a tragic mistake, the wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or something far more disturbing, a calculated act carried out with patience and precision? Each theory opened new questions, but closed none. There was no single explanation that fit perfectly. Every possibility left something unresolved, and that uncertainty became the most troubling part. Because when every theory remains possible, the truth hides deeper, protected by time, silence, and unanswered questions. As the case stalled, fresh attention arrived. Outside agencies stepped in, files were reviewed again, and a reward was offered. A clear message that this story was not forgotten. The hope was simple, that time had loosened someone's silence, a detail once dismissed, a memory finally spoken, a conscience no longer willing to carry the weight. The renewed focus brought brief momentum, but still, no breakthrough followed. The mystery held firm, refusing to give itself up. Yet the message was clear. This case was still open, and someone, somewhere, still knew the truth. As months turned into years, the questions stayed where they were, unanswered. The park reopened. Life moved forward. But for the families, time didn't heal anything. It only stretched the absence. Carnell and Kate became names tied to uncertainty. Not because they were forgotten, but because the truth never arrived. Someone out there remembers that day differently. Someone noticed something that never seemed important. And someone chose silence. That silence is the final barrier. Because justice doesn't always need more evidence. Sometimes it needs a voice. Some stories end with answers. This one ends with waiting. Carnell, Sledge, and Kate Brown were more than a case number, more than headlines, more than theories. They were lives, full of meaning, relationships, and moments that mattered. And yet, their final moments remain locked behind silence. Years have passed. The park still stands. The river still flows. People still walk those same paths, often unaware of what happened there. But for the families, time hasn't moved forward in the same way. Every day carries the same question. Not anger, not revenge, just why. Someone knows what happened. Someone remembers something that hasn't been shared. And somewhere, the truth still exists, waiting to surface. Unsolved cases don't fade because they lack importance. They linger because justice hasn't arrived. So this story remains open, not frozen in the past, but alive in memory, in hope, and in the belief that silence does not last forever. If you know something, speak. If you remember something, share it. Because answers don't always come from evidence alone. Sometimes they come from courage. Until that day, Carnell and Kate are remembered not for how their lives ended, but for who they were. And this case is still waiting.